Hello, welcome to the Breathwork course. My name is Drew, and in this lesson, we're going to go over just a quick overview of what breathwork is, just to kind of like set the groundwork, lay some foundational kind of understanding, so we're all on the same page. Let's get straight into it, shall we? Click. Here we go. So, what is breath work? It's a kind of a broad term for various breathing practices that involve consciously altering one's breathing pattern to influence your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well being. So, it's really about you're taking control of your breathing, which is normally the central nervous system does it all for you. You don't have to think about it. Breathwork is really about, okay, we're going to interrupt that automated process and we're going to intentionally control our breathing through various techniques and methods. That's what it's about. So, what can you do with breathwork? Kind of like some of the therapeutic goals, or why would people employ breathwork protocols? Probably the most common one is for stress. There's a really um, big link between stress and how you breathe, and you can kind of calm your body down, your nervous system down, your emotional state down by just slowing down your breathing exercise and by your breathing and doing various breathing techniques. So you can do it in the acute sense. So if you've got a stressful situation, you can do some breathing exercises to kind of help calm you down or just kind of like bring you a little bit down into the present. So then you can kind of do the thing you want to do and perform. And then there's more the chronic kind of stress, whereas if you practice regularly and daily, you essentially train a lot of the kind of the nervous system to more into a more of a self-regulated mode, if you will. And so then over periods of time that you kind of handle stress a lot more efficiently and effectively, and you can kind of come back to your baseline or your balance state or or your homeostatic kind of regulation. Then we have energy. So the whole kind of reason we breathe in and out is to get oxygen into the lungs and then expel carbon dioxide, which is a metabolic byproduct of creating energy. So the more efficient you can breathe and understand how to breathe and use all your breathing muscles and the mechanics of breathing, the more oxygen you can deliver to tissues and to cells, which will give you more energy. So that's a fantastic one you can do to employ breathwork protocols. Emotional regulation is another big one. So breathing is very much closely tied to emotions. So, for example, when you are stressed, you will breathe quicker. When you are sad and you're crying is a form of breathing as well. So a lot of the emotional states are connected to different kind of breathing patterns. So we can kind of replicate some of those emotional states physically, and then because the vagus nerve is 80% body to brain, we can then kind of help regulate emotional states through various breathing practices, which is super interesting. Pain is another one we can use breathing exercises to do. So you may have had that experience where you stub your big toe and you just like have to take a few big, slow, deep breaths in just to kind of like steady yourself. Now, pain's a super complicated topic, and suffice to say, we're still learning more about how pain works. But essentially, like a very broad kind of base view, is pain kind of has three levels. So there's tissue level, so where muscle, bone, or the peripheral. So you can get pain there. So maybe if you cut yourself or you pull a muscle, so your body will sense those pain regions there. Then you've got kind of more central kind of pain, as in like the spinal cord type pain and discogenic pain. So if you hurt your back, slipped a disc, have got a slight disc herniation, and maybe compressing a nerve root. So we call that more discogenic type pain. So that's pain kind of originating more from the center of the body, from the kind of the spinal column. And then we have more central nervous system pain, which is kind of from the brain down to the body. And particularly in that central nervous system type of pain, it's more of a learnt response over a long period of time. So what can happen is that you can get an injury. The injury can heal, maybe you broke a bone, for example. The bone heals after a good 12 months, but for some reason, the brain still thinks there's an injury there, or there's a risk of injury to there. So it can kind of do all kinds of crazy things like increasing nociception or pain sensitization in that area to, in a way, to stop you from using that area, to prevent you from re-injuring it, even though the structure's healed. So there's some processing that we can kind of do to help rewire the brain to say that it's psychologically safe to do. And we can, big part of doing that is you'll do a lot of breathing work to first engage your parasympathetic nervous system so you're in a calm state, and then you can then gently, like a bit like exposure theory, gently introduce different um, levels of resistance or tension or stress to that area, so the body then goes, okay, it's actually safe. And so breathing is a big part of that, because you're fearful of hurting something, and then you're going to breathe your way through it. We have immune system regulation. So there's that classic study by Wim Hof where he had, I think it was 7 or 8 people doing his super ventilation techniques, and they injected him with like a cold, and they were able to attenuate the effect of that cold with the breathing techniques he does. So we can mobilize the immune system, particularly when we do the sympathetic nervous system activity. So that's super interesting as well. So if you're doing regular breathwork practices, you can kind of, in a sense, train your immune system to be a bit more robust. And again, we're still doing a lot more research in that area and really teasing out the mechanism of that immune system is incredibly complicated. So, stay tuned. Altered states of consciousness, which we'll talk about a little bit. So essentially what we can do is change blood flow dynamics to the brain, and that creates various different states of consciousness, similar to what you get in psychedelic use, but not the same, because you're not actually taking drugs. You're just getting high on your own supply, so to speak. Concentration and focus. So typically when you're doing breathwork practices, it requires a fair bit of concentration, focus, and effort to employ, depending on the protocol you're using. So that enhances the various neural networks and structures that really around being able to maintain your focus and maintain your concentration. Particularly in today's attention economy, that's something that's really, really valuable. Respiratory issues. So a big part of breathwork is learning how to actually breathe correctly. So we have the biomechanical aspect of breathing. So using your diaphragm, your intercostals, your primary respiratory muscles, and then all your secondary respiratory muscles, including all your obliques. So your internal, your transverse oblique, your internal oblique, your external oblique, your rectus abdominis, your quadratus lumborum, your scalenes, it's a big one people often forget about, your traps. Essentially any muscle that's connected to the rib cage has an effect on respiration. So we can have the mechanical aspect of learning how to breathe correctly. Then there's the more of the physiological or biochemical aspect of regulating blood gases. So differences between carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitric oxide, 3 really important gases, which we'll talk about a lot. That way we have the right balance of gases in the body, because oxygen is a gas, that we can kind of deliver to the tissues to get them oxygenated. So that's going to be a really, really important thing. And then you also have the kind of the neuropsychology of respiration, and like using your mind to slow down and to mindfully breathe as well. It's a big component to that. So all these areas are interrelated. It's very hard to kind of like separate them all out. Then we have all the cardiovascular benefits. So we have this concept of sinus arrhythmia. So essentially, as the heart is beating, it's slowing down and speeding up in relation to how much blood is pumping in and out, and then that's got a close relationship to the lungs. And so what we can do is sync the heartbeat with the lungs, and so that they work in what's called coherence. So they're basically working together. And so then you get, and that's a really calm state in the body. So if you get into heart rate coherence, your HRV will increase, your heart rate variability will increase, which is a good indicator of parasympathetic nervous system function, which means that you're relaxed and calm. So this heart rate is finally connected to respiration and vice versa. And then we will have the peripheral and systemic benefits of breathing. And we have some interesting kind of work coming out in nasal breathing and maximizing your nitric oxide levels to increase vasodilation. So we're going to act like a natural vasodilator. So that has really good implications for blood flow out into the muscles, into the periphery, things like blood pressure, and then just getting more blood to the tissues. More blood equals more oxygen, which will more work. So there's some implications there in exercise, which we're pretty interested to explore. And then, of course, exercise. So nasal breathing during exercise, when to do it, when not to do it. We're having some new research coming out recently, which is super fascinating. So we'll be talking about nasal breathing. But the take home is that essentially up to your lactate threshold or your anaerobic threshold, you should be able to train nasally. And then once you surpass that, depending on the intensity, there's a switch point where you'll go from nasal to oral breathing. And we'll talk a lot about that in this course as well. So, roots of breath work, super fascinating. We have got really two quite classical, traditional approaches to breath work. One is the yoga, kind of Indian breath work practice called pranayama. So, in classical yoga, you would do asana first, which is the stretchy, bendy stuff, so the movement practice. Then you would do pranayama, which is the breathing practice, and then you would do meditation. Okay, so I'm a big fan of that kind of process. So move the body first, then breathe, and then you do your quiet seated meditation if you're doing meditation practice versus just jumping into breathing exercise or jumping straight into meditation. That can be quite difficult to do for beginners. So India's in the yogic kind of community has been got a really, really rich history. 3,000 years BC. So it's been around for a long time, and a lot of the modern breathwork techniques you see are just variations of pranayama. Okay, so we're kind of discovering what's old is new again. And then we have Qigong from traditional Chinese martial arts and Chinese medicine. This is my particular preferred style of practice. So again, we got a long, rich history of around 2,000 years PC. And in China, similar to yoga, there are many different styles and methods of practices, lots of different lineages. So which teacher you kind of trained under, which family that you were raised in. So you have lots of different methods and styles and techniques in yoga and in qigong. But once we understand the principles of practice, the principles of anatomy and physiology and the neuropsychology and how all those come together, it really explains all these different practices. And so in this course, we'll be taking a real principle-based approach to which practice to employ and how to employ it. Now, the biggest difference in pranayama is it is very much embedded in kind of Hinduism, and there's a big spiritual component to it, or a big religious component to yoga. So a lot of modern yoga people don't really practice the really old classical yoga, but it's definitely embedded in that as well. And similar thing with Qigong. Qigong has various branches. There's a martial art branch in Qigong. There's a Buddhist branch in Qigong, so it's Buddhist Qigong. There's a medical branch. It's all about just optimizing health and function. And then there's what's called the scholar branch, which is really just about health and longevity. So depending which lineage you go, which teacher you kind of follow, you'll be doing different styles. Okay, but again, we're looking at the principles of practice. So really rich. And one of the great things in the internet era is that you can find heaps of amazing teachers and examples on social media, on YouTube, and etc. So you can explore those ones in great depth. In terms of modern breathwork in the West, there's two teachers who really kind of started doing the work in the early 60s and 70s. So we have Leonard AI, who's known for the rebreathing breathwork technique. Involves around 60 to 90-minute sessions of continuous circular and circular breathing without pauses between the inhale and the exhale, and often it's done in warm water. And the idea here is to kind of create like a womb experience. This is something I haven't actually practiced myself. I don't have a lot of experiential knowledge in this area, but he has been doing it for quite a long time, and it's still ongoing there. So that's an interesting technique. And then we also have Stanislav Grof, who created holotropic breathwork in the mid 70s. So Stanislav is a psychiatrist, worked and trained in many very reputable universities and hospitals in America. And this is the one who's really kind of connected to developing altered states of consciousness through breathing exercises. And essentially, what happens here is you employ rapid controlled hyperventilation techniques, similar to what Wim Hof techniques would be employing. This changes the carbon dioxide level, so you get a hypocapnia, so carbon dioxide levels drop, which creates respiratory alkalosis, which means that your pH increases. Um, and what that means is it essentially creates hypoxia in the brain. And so you get various different regions of the brain where you get changes in perfusion and blood flow to different areas. And it seems to be that the areas in the brain which are related to emotions and memory and trauma seem to get more blood flow and versus other areas during this type of work, and then that uh, um, seems to allow you to access the emotions and the memories. So then you can do the work around counseling and trying to understand and make meaning of different things from your history and your past. So it's a really interesting area. Again, this is not something that I've done a lot myself, but it is in a growing field, and there is some kind of interesting research coming out now as well. What's really important here, if you're doing this type of work, is set and setting. So you do really need, anytime you're working with trauma or real emotional issues, you do need a good guide. So that could be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor or someone who's highly trained in helping people navigate through those emotional regulation responses. Because when you bring up these emotions, if you're not in the right set and setting, it can be quite traumatic, and you can re-traumatize people, which is something that you want to avoid. Okay, so if that's something you're interested in doing, is creating altered states of consciousness, similar to psychedelics, but not exactly the same because you're not taking a drug, you're just using your own breath. That's something you might want to explore. In terms of more the modern approach, we have academic and clinical definitions of breathwork. So if you're looking into the academic and clinical literature, breathwork is generally defined as the intentional, conscious, and volitional manipulation or regulation of breathing patterns, such as alterations in depth, rate, rhythm, or technique to achieve the therapeutic effect on mental, emotional, physical, or psychological states. So there's a lot in that. It's really interesting. So, as an exercise physiologist, when I'm prescribing exercise, the variables that I'm really prescribing is depth. So, how much air you're pulling in and out. So, the depth of your breath. Rate. So, how many breaths you're taking a minute. So 5 breaths a minute versus 10 breaths a minute versus 30 breaths a minute all have different effects on the body. Rhythm. So that's the kind of combination of depth and rate creating a rhythm over time. So we call this a ratio. And then the techniques. So which technique are you using? So there are multiple different techniques to explore. Are you doing diaphragmatic breathing? Are you doing superventilation breathing? Are you doing alternate nostril breathing, nasal breathing? Like, what are the actual specific techniques you're using? And then we have different effects on the mental, emotional, physical, and physiological state. So when you start looking into research, there's research that's actively ongoing in emotional, mental regulation. There's research on the physical aspects of breathing. So, for example, the zone of apposition and how the diaphragm is really, really important in stabilization of the spine. So, people who don't breathe well, I have often, in my experience, a lower back injury at some point. And there's a big connection between your lower back and your abdominal muscles, your core muscles, and the diaphragm and how they all work together. The physiological effects, so with lots of research going into, for example, hypercapnic work, hypoxia work, so intermittent hypercapnic hypoxia training or IHHT or box breathing, and the effects of manipulating those gases in the body and how they affect oxygenation of tissues and vasodilation, vasoconstriction, and these kind of things. Perfusion. So perfusion just means molecules moving from one structure to the next structure across a membrane, typically. So, or we could just have a simple kind of explanation, deliberately altering the way one breathes. So, often positioned as an emerging non-pharmaceutical intervention for mental health issues and stress regulation. So, we have, for example, here the effects of diaphragmatic breathing on attention, negative effect, and stress in healthy adults. So, these are three really key areas. So, attention, your ability to kind of concentrate and focus. Negative affects, so how you feel, and then stress, so just the stress in your body. So that's actually a really interesting paper if you want to dig into that one. It's a nice read. So key breathing techniques. When you look at all the different breathing techniques, you look at the qigong breathing techniques, you look at the pranayama techniques, you look at the modern breathwork techniques in coming out of the West. Essentially, you can categorize them into two buckets. So you have slow breathing techniques, and then you have fast breathing techniques, or high ventilation breath work. Essentially, one is more parasympathetically orientated, so engages the parasympathetic nervous system, so more calming, cooling, soothing, regulating, and one is more stimulating, so it's activating, it's mobilizing your energy, it's releasing cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine, it's mobilizing the immune system. So it's like a very much a yin and yang, and depending on the technique you employ, and depending on the states you want to create in your body, in your brain, in your mind, you select appropriate techniques to facilitate that, and you can combine them as well. So you can do slow breathing techniques, then you can introduce hyperventilation techniques, and then finish with slow breathing techniques, depending on the state of how you want to feel when you finish. So that's super interesting. And so in this course, we'll be exploring a lot of different techniques and how to do them and why to do them. And we have breathwork and stress. So this is one of the most recent meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is one of the higher levels of kind of evidence in kind of the research world. So this one is where they take random control trials and they collate them together, and then they review and assess the findings in the data from all of the reviews, all the trials, and then they basically summarize it. Okay. So instead of you having to go read the 12 studies that was in this particular um, meta-analysis, they've done the work for you. I'm actually about to start doing one of these myself. It's quite a big job. Um, so, and essentially, so we conducted the first comprehensive systematic review and meta-analysis of RCTs on the effect of breathwork on self-reported stress and subjective stress, analysing 12 studies which comprised a total of 785 participants. Breathwork yielded a significant post-intervention between group effect of breathwork on stress compared to non-breathwork controls, denoting breathwork was associated with lower stress levels than controls. So essentially, they've kind of like taken these 12 studies and collated them together, and they're providing some significant findings that compared to the controls. And most of the controls in the 12 studies were mindful breathing exercises. So it's like doing meditation or mindful stress-based reduction, but you're not actually changing your breathing ratio or rate. So not really changing those key variables we were discussing before. And so they can show that you can decrease your stress, your perceived stress, quite significantly. That's a pretty big deal because that gives us some really good support that if we employ these techniques, particularly for stress, and a lot of health conditions, really stress is at the center of the spoke of all the health conditions. So you think about anything related to health and the stress that comes with it, if you can help regulate stress and then shift from people being sympathetic into more parasympathetic, then you can help people with their healing. Okay, so it's more of a macro effect. So you're not trying to like do specific um, healing of tissues per se. What you're doing is you're just letting the body do the work by engaging it and giving it the things it needs by accessing and enhancing the parasympathetic nervous system. It's very, very, very powerful. So once you do that and you train it, the body gets used to it, and you just become a lot chiller, more calm, more regulated, and just a nicer, happier, fun person to be around. This is pretty cool. And then just to finish up, we have some really popular breathwork methods, and I really encourage everyone to explore and try the different methods that are out there. They're all doing something slightly different, but they're all using core principles of pranayama or of qigong in various different ways, and of the modern breathwork techniques. And they're just really just packaging them in a way to a community that really speaks to them. So, for example, we've got Wim Hof method. So, I think I heard Wim Hof is described as being a bit of a shaman, like a kind of like a medicine man type personality, which I think is pretty fitting for Wim Hof. So he's using a technique, super ventilation technique, with cold immersion, the Iceman, and meditation. The super ventilation technique is really just an old Tibetan Qigong breathing exercise. So that's nothing new. And you'll also see variations of that in pranayama too. So again, it's nothing new. It's just the way he's presenting it and packaging it. Um, really speaks and works for a lot of people. So definitely encourage you to try it and give it a go. Then you've got Oxygen Advantage, which Patrick McEwen, he wrote the Oxygen Advantage book probably about 20 years ago. So way ahead of the curve. He was one of the real big guys to really push breathwork to the mainstream. So big credit to Patrick McEwen and his work. Um, he runs courses all over the world now. He's really doing great work. And he's really more orientated around nasal breathing and training hypoxia. So getting used to being um, having breath hunger, and then what that does is it actually enhances your biochemistry in the body, so you're using oxygen more efficiently. So his method and his training techniques are really good, and particularly if you're into exercise and sport, they have a course where they've kind of adapted it to yoga practice, which is kind of funny because it's really just yoga in its original form anyway. But anyway, so definitely check out his stuff. It's really good. Soma Breath is another one. I think they had a study through Cambridge University, which we'll review during the course, which is really interesting, having some good results on various aspects of stress again. I think they include a bit more of a community kind of approach and introduce um, music, I believe. I haven't actually done the Soma Breath training myself, so I can't really speak too much about it there on a personal level, but I know it's quite popular. We have Shift. Shift is really good. So that's Brian McKenzie from Power Speed Endurance. That was his old kind of brand. He does a lot of work with Andy Gelfin and Dr. Andrew Huberman. You may have seen them on social media. And he really is popularized the carbon dioxide tolerance test, which we will be using. So much more of a kind of science-based approach, much more of a athletic performance. People really pushing the boundaries or really looking to kind of regulate in a very grounded kind of scientific, practical approach. So really recommend those guys if that speaks to you. You have Buteyko. Buteyko is like from Russia, probably the original therapeutic breathing training coming out of all the East or Eastern Bloc, but then kind of moved into the West. And so Buteyko is really well known for like treating things like asthma and various other respiratory conditions. Although I just did see a white paper on Buteyko released from the Australian government, and it didn't seem to like it too much. So we'll go into that paper and we'll explore it at some point and dig down deep. But I know a lot of people who practice Buteyko. I know some practitioners, and um, they get a lot of repeat business. And one thing in the health space is that if the things you are doing, particularly in private health, if the things that you do where you can't access met from like various funding bodies because it hasn't been given that kind of under that privilege yet, uh, people won't come back if it doesn't work. So for some reason, people come back. So do with that what you will. And then we have Breathology with Stig. I can never pronounce his last name, but he has one of the world records for underwater breath holding, which is nearly 20 minutes or just over 20 minutes. So pretty amazing what's potentially possible. Stig has got a fantastic online course and training. So if you're into anything breathwork in the water, he's probably the guy to go towards. In this course, what I'm going to do here is really just come at it from a first principles perspective, and just kind of give you the kind of the science behind it and the practical behind it. So the how, what, whys, and hows, and then you've got the tools to be able to kind of create and use your own breathwork protocols. So let's get into it, shall we?